All right. All right. So we are gonna plow through last week's review. We're gonna try to plow through a lot of material today. I'm gonna try to cover a ton. So this is recorded. So if I move too fast, go see the recording, hopefully, and that will help. If I'm going too fast and you want to keep up, don't feel like you can't raise your hand and ask a question. So last week, one of the things we talked about was we finished talking about the standardization of versification of the Bible. We talked about the chapters of the Bible, and then we shifted back to England from Geneva. Okay, so we have Stephanus, who's in Geneva. Just as a reminder, Stephanus is in Geneva, running from the French, the Sorbonne, and the French government that would be heavily Roman, uh, uh, aligned with the Roman Church. And then we have the Queen of England. So we're back to the Queen of England, Mary the First. She's persecuting Protestants, and they are fleeing. And so we talked about where they would flee to, particularly those that are fleeing to Geneva are the ones we want to focus our attention on, though there are other places that they're fleeing to as well. And so in Geneva, we've got John Calvin and his consistory. They are sort of the ruling body there. John Calvin's part of the consistory. And they set up an economy, a government, largely revolving around the study of the scriptures. That's the purpose of Geneva's existence, is to study scripture. But then they get this massive influx of, and remember, Geneva is mostly French. Geneva's French. And so now they get this massive influx of English refugees who are running for their lives. And they show up and they get integrated into their economy. And then Calvin and the consistory and others recognize that these are English-speaking people without an English church. They need an English church. They have French churches. They need an English one. And they need an English Bible. And they have Robert Stephanus on site. We have his Hebrew. We have his Greek. So they can start working on an English Bible. And when that is decided, two men are picked. Sir Roland is going to oversee the publication of the Geneva Bible, and William Whittingham is going to oversee the translation of the Geneva Bible. And he's going to put together a team of scholars. And we talked about one of the first scholars that's going to be picked for that team is going to be Miles Coverdale. And if you remember Miles Coverdale, he was the one that made the Coverdale Bible right after Tyndale, right before Tyndale was martyred for the Tyndale Bible and Protestant doctrines. Coverdale released his first translation of the full English Bible. And this will be the first English Bible. Coverdale's Bible is the first complete English Bible from the Hebrew and Greek text. Okay, Tyndale's was the first Greek New Testament in English, but Coverdale was the first one to complete a full Bible. Okay, and then he worked on the second translation. The second translation was the Matthew's Bible, in which him and Rogers worked together to combine his works with Tyndale's works. And so we get a combination of Tyndale and Coverdale's works in the Matthew's Bible. This gets the attention of Henry VIII, Cranmer, and Cromwell. They licensed that Bible for use in the English church. But then Cromwell and Cranmer convinced the king that they needed translation by the Church of England for the Church of England. And they commissioned Coverdale to do that translation. And that translation is the Great Bible. So now we're in Geneva a few decades later, and Coverdale is being commissioned again to be part of a team of men who will work on the Geneva Bible. So this is Coverdale's fourth translation work. This man is a translator extraordinaire, as I like to call him. He is got his finger on nearly every single English Bible during the Reformation. And so I ended last week by reading this quote from him, and we'll read it again, and then we'll pick up new material. Now, in contrast, some men think that many translations make division in the faith and in the people of God. That is not so. For it were never better with the congregation of God than when almost every church had the Bible of a different translation. Therefore, it ought not to be thought of as evil that such men as have understanding now in our time exercise themselves in languages and give their diligence to translate out of one language into another. Yes, we ought rather to give God great thanks, therefore, which through his Spirit stir up men's minds so to exercise themselves therein. I wish to God that it had never stopped after the time of St. Augustine, then we never would have come into such blindness and ignorance, into such errors and delusions. So Coverdale is laying heavily at the feet of the state of the Roman Church, the current state of the Roman Church in his day, largely at the feet of the fact that they only ever had one translation for the last 1,200 years. They used the Latin Vulgate and nothing else. So his argument is, if we had kept many translations, we would be better off. And Coverdale put his money where his mouth is. He worked on 4 translations. And what I just read to you is the preface, is part of the preface to his first translation. So he wrote this before he'd even touched a second translation. He already believed there should be multiple translations, and he would, because he's writing his alongside Tyndale, who also believed that. And this is a common theme throughout the Reformation, that multiple translations is for the edification of the church, not for the division of the church. And like I said last week, that became my heart as well. So Geneva, the Geneva Bible will be the first English Bible to be done by a team of scholars. Every Bible up to this point in English has been done by a single individual. So Wycliffe did his. Granted, I don't believe all of these men did it exclusively, but these men would have bore the brunt of the work, okay? The vast brunt of the work would have fallen on them. They would have used other people, other helps, but it wasn't a team of people who were equally involved in the project. The Geneva Bible will be the first of its kind in that way. So the Wycliffe Bible, the Tyndale Bible, the Coverdale Bible, the Matthews Bible, even the Matthews Bible, you might say, well, there's a team of 3 guys, but it's not really. It's the individual work of Tyndale and the individual work of Coverdale put together. They didn't collaborate, if you will. And the Great Bible, and then you have now you have the Geneva Bible. So the Geneva Bible is going to be the first of its kind. We don't know exactly how many people are going to be involved in the Geneva Bible. I think we have about 12 names that we know are listed, but we also know that Calvin and Geneva, they had colleges teaching Greek and Hebrew and English and French and multiple other languages. And so they had a slew of students itching to put into practice what they've been learning. And so I don't doubt there could have been dozens upon dozens of graduates from the college working on this Bible, partially because it does happen relatively quickly. We've got a few years. It takes a few years for this to come about. Most translations in this time are taking more than a few years, especially in the Old Testament. But this is, they see an immediate need. So they are not taking their time per se. They're not rushing through it. They're not doing something that's going to be poor quality because they're rushing. But they do prioritize. They do suggest to themselves, hey, we've got a lot of English-speaking people here. We need an English Bible for them. What do they need right now for worship? What do they need right now? And so it takes them a few years, but what they decided that the English people needed right now in order to have sufficient church services was the New Testament and the Book of Psalms. The New Testament. So the New Testament is written to the church, and Psalms is the hymn book. So this is their hymn book, and this is their Bible. So in 1557, the whole concept of a New Testament and Psalms, that starts here. That's with Geneva. And so that's what they have. Now, what's interesting here too is, I won't get into it, but Luther and Calvin had quite a bit of debate on what to do with the Psalms as far as worship is concerned. Luther believed you could sing any kind of song, like hymns, much like we do, spiritual songs, things of that nature, set it to music and sing that during worship. And he believed on a more restrictive way that if you were going to sing the Psalms, you had to sing them the way the translators translated it. You couldn't adjust it. Okay. Calvin, on the other hand, did not believe you could sing songs of any kind. He believed you could only sing the Psalms, but you could rearrange them to have more meter and things of that nature for your benefit as an English speaker. And you could not use instruments. There were no instruments. Instruments were not allowed and there's some churches today. In fact, my wife and I are probably going to Scotland next year, and there's a denomination of Presbyterians there called the Free Church of Scotland. They still sing primarily a cappella, though the church has had a split recently in the last couple of years as to whether or not they can use instruments. But the Free Church of Scotland, historically, up until very recently, did not use instruments in their worship service. It's all a cappella. So I actually want to go to one of their services. I want to check it out. So that's that. So now 1558 happens. So we're just going to interrupt what's happening in Geneva for a moment. We'll go back to Geneva in a second. We just needed to cover real quickly what happens in England in 1558. And that is Catherine of Aragon's daughter, Mary I, Henry's first wife's and first daughter, Mary dies in 1558. So her reign of bloodshed comes to an end, and there's a new queen. And the new queen, if you remember Anne Boleyn, Henry's second wife, the one he had beheaded, she had a daughter. Remember, she couldn't bear a son either. And her daughter, Queen Elizabeth, she now is heir to the throne. And so now she takes the throne. And so this is largely why we were covering the wives and what was going on, is because the two daughters that were basically rejected by Henry VIII for not being sons are now back-to-back queens to the throne. So we'll circle back to Elizabeth and what she looks like and how she's going to deal with the Roman Church, Protestantism, and the Church of England. We'll circle back to her in a minute. But that's just happening while they're doing this in Geneva. So Geneva started with the 1557 was just Psalms and New Testament. By 1560, they complete the Bible. And we get the Geneva 1560 edition. That's what I have right here. This is a facsimile of the 1560 edition of the Geneva Bible, if you want to take a look at it. The Geneva Bible is going to be a first in many ways, so we'll talk about some of that. Like I said, Geneva was the first to be done by a team of scholars. Today, we would call it a committee. Another thing which is really cool in Geneva is, remember I said, if you were in Geneva, you pretty much had a few jobs. You were agricultural, so you're going to feed the people. You were going to do watchmaking. The whole Swiss watchmaking industry starts here. So with Geneva. Or you were going to help the publishers. And one of the ways you would help the publishers is you created what are called woodcut stamps. And so you can actually see a woodcut stamp right here on the front. Okay, those are stamps in which they cut out the empty space and they leave the protruded space to create the stamp. And they have to do it in reverse image as well. It's not uncommon to see woodcut stamps on title pages like you see here. That's pretty normal. It's usually a single stamp, covers the front title page. But what makes the Geneva Bible different is they started putting woodcut stamps throughout the whole Bible. And so there's artistry throughout the whole Bible. In the Geneva Bible preface, he basically says that there are some things that the Bible describes that that is best understood with a picture. And so they do pictures of maps of different items like the Ark of the Covenant, the basin to wash your hands, the temple layout. I don't have it up here, but they have one with the priest's garments and the labels of each of the items on the priest's garment. And so this is huge. This isn't the first Bible with artwork in it, but this is the first Bible with artwork made with production in mind. Before it was done by hand. Now they're stamping these images right onto the Bible so that they can make a lot really quickly. The other thing is you'll notice that this is a 4-column Bible, a 4-column Bible. So you got a column here, a column here, a column here, and a column here. The 2 center columns are the main text. That's the text of Scripture. And the outside columns are footnotes for helping the interpretation of Scripture, cross-references, definitions of words, and short explanations of particular doctrines and things of that nature. And so this, nearly almost every verse has a footnote with it. Not every verse, but nearly every verse has a footnote with it. So between the footnotes and the pictures, this is essentially the first English study Bible. This is a study Bible. This is where it comes from. And the people love it. Protestants absolutely love this Bible. It receives wide reception very early by English-speaking people. So gained rapid succession. Now, 1559, which is a year before the Geneva Bible finishes, Robert Stephanus dies at the age of 56, likely due to an illness. But I want to cover one of the things. One of the things we've been doing all along is that person's work that they finished, in this case, his Greek New Testament and Old Testament, is it perfect? Did they do the job? Is it all done? Is it absolutely perfect? Have we resolved all of the issues? And the answer is no. And so I like to always give an example of where we think we got it wrong. And there's one particular text in that I'll demonstrate here, just one, where generally we have universal agreement that Stephanus got this particular thing wrong. There are some people that disagree and think Stephanus got it right. I'll mention them in a moment. But in 1 John 2:23, in the Geneva Bible, which is representative of Stephanus's Greek New Testament, so this would be an English translation of what Stephanus did. In 1 John 2:23, it says, "Whosoever denieth the Son, the same hath not the Father." Now, the KJV, you're going to see, is an extra phrase here, and it's in italics. We'll talk about that in a second. But they write, "Whosoever denieth the Son, the same hath not the Father, but he that acknowledgeth the Son hath the Father also." The KJV puts that in, and the reason the KJV translators opt for the second phrase to be included is because Beza, who we're going to talk about in a moment, Beza is the guy who's going to pick up Stephanus's work. Beza includes that phrase from his Greek manuscripts that he has. The KJV translators think that actually the KJV translators are uncertain if that phrase should belong or not. And the way they tell the reader that they're uncertain is they put the whole second half of the verse in italics. So generally speaking, the KJV translators would put in italics to let the reader know we supplied these words for clarity, but you won't find them in the Greek or Hebrew. They were necessary, though, because English doesn't work without them. In this case, though, the KJV translator said, we're supplying these words with the uncertainty of whether or not they belong. Today, we agree with the KJV translators. We do think they belong. And so you have the CSB here, which is representative of most of the Bibles in your laps, is going to say no one who denies the Son has the Father. He who confesses the Son has the Father as well. Okay, it's the same thing as the KJV, just written slightly different. What's interesting, though, is the TCENT, which is the Textual Critic English New Testament. It agrees with the Geneva Bible. This is a relatively recent translation. It agrees with the Geneva Bible. But if you guys remember, I kind of showed you that there were like 3 camps for modern textual criticism. If you remember this, we said we had a reasoned eclecticism camp, and we had a KJV TR only camp, and we had a Byzantine / majority text camp. The TCENT is representative of the Byzantine majority text camp. And so they have a footnote at the bottom there that says 70% of the 70% of the manuscripts that we have, 71% of the manuscripts that we have, do not contain the second half of that verse. So they stick with the majority text. Now, the reason I have the World English Bible up here and the 2024 edition specifically is because they are another translation of the majority Byzantine text tradition, and they include the verse against the TCENT. So these two are in the same camp, but they have come to two different conclusions as to what to do with the second half of the verse. They put in this footnote on their website for the change that they made because their first edition included it, a later edition removed it, and then they put it back. And the reason they put it back is given it in this footnote. I'm not going to actually read the whole footnote, but the footnote basically suggests that the article that's highlighted there helps give the explanation to why they put the phrase back in. The article is written by my friend Peter Gurry. If you remember Peter Gurry, when we had the split screen of 4 people on the screen debating over 1 John 5:7, Peter Gurry was the one that challenged Jeff Riddle as to whether or not evidence, any kind of evidence would convince him. And Jeff Riddle said no. And Peter Gurry said, then why are we talking about evidence? It's a red herring for you. All right. So Peter Gurry wrote an article basically demonstrating, I'm bringing all sorts of stuff back from older lessons. Let's see if you guys remember. When we talked about the Masoretic text, we talked about 2 verses in Joshua that are not in the Masoretic text, that are in our Bibles. And I showed you that the reason they're missing in the Masoretic text is because of something called homeoteliuton, which means same ending. What happens is when the scribe sees the same ending in 2 verses, sometimes their eye skips. They finished writing the first verse, they look away, and the last word they go back to, but it's also the last word of the next verse. And so they skip and they start the next verse completely missing the verse unintentionally. It's a very common scribal error. We do it today when we're copying stuff today. And so Peter Gurry says, when the longer reading can be explained by homeoteliuton, or the skipping of a phrase because of a same ending, then we prefer the longer reading. And he does a very good job of explaining all of this. And so the longer reading here, what you just see is you see, come on, son, father, right? In Greek, that's what you're seeing. That's the last words. You see son, father, and then this next phrase is son, father. If you wrote down and you finished father, and then you jumped back to your manuscript to see what you needed to write down next, you jumped to the second father instead of the first father, and you missed the phrase. And so that error got copied multiple times, creating the majority text, the majority of text that we have today. But we have plenty of text, over 20% of text that show the second half of the verse, and the earlier texts also show the second half of the verse. So today, most people, unless you are absolutely convicted that the majority is better, that you're just going to go with the majority, despite something of like homeoteliuton being an obvious influence on why it would be missing, with the exception of that small group of people, nearly everyone agrees Stephanus gets this one wrong when he does his critical edition, that the second half of that verse belongs. So, moving on. Stephanus was an amazing text critic, though. This was not to disparage him. This was just to demonstrate that he's human. And we're going to talk about humans throughout this, and none of them are going to do it perfectly. But his legacy is that his text becomes the standard Greek New Testament for nearly every translation during the Reformation era, except the KJV. We'll talk about that. KJV chooses a different Greek New Testament as the primary source. But every other translation in every other language pretty much sticks with Stephanus. Also, on a side note, we talked about Stephanus standardizing the verse numbers in both the Old and New Testament. We talked about how the chapter numbers were standardized by Langton. But if you also remember early on, when we talked about the canon, Tyndale, Luther, and others, the New Testament was rearranged different. Acts was in a different spot, Hebrews was in a different spot, so on and so forth. Stephanus, the way our New Testament is laid out today, is how Stephanus standardized it. So one of the things that Stephanus did differently is that he included Acts right after John instead of after Luke or some other place in the New Testament. So we have Acts after the four Gospels. That is unique to, I don't know if it's entirely unique. I don't want to say he's the first to do it, but he's the one who standardizes. So our New Testament layout, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and all the songs we sing to help teach the kids the New Testament book order, we can thank Stephanus for that. Now, Stephanus dies, and a man picks up his work. That man is named Theodore Beza. He is John Calvin's protege. He's a great theologian, and he is a great reviser of the Greek New Testament. He's going to pick up Stephanus's work, and he's going to continue it. And Theodore Beza does 10 editions of the Greek New Testament. Everyone else we've talked to about up to this point does like 3, 4, 5 editions. He's going to double it in his lifetime. He's going to do 10 editions of the Greek New Testament, different revisions each time. We're going to talk about 8 different years because in at least 2 of these years, he releases a new revision twice in the same year. So he is pretty, he goes through that pretty quickly. So we have the 1565, 76, 82, 88, 89, 90, and 98. The other thing that's interesting about this is, as we showed before, every time a Greek New Testament comes out, a new translation follows. New Testament, new Greek, new English translation. So the Geneva Bible is going through many revisions at the same time. This, I think, is going to eventually hurt the popularity of the Geneva Bible because they don't seem to stop, even after Beza dies. So that's going to hurt eventually, but new revisions are coming out very frequently of the New Testament. Small, minor changes, but they do happen more often. One of the more major additions is the 1599 Geneva Bible, and that's this one right here. This is a modern printing of the 1599, so it's got modern spelling, unlike my 1560 retains the 1560 spelling. This one just has modern spelling, modern punctuation, but this is the 1599 edition. What's really interesting about the 1599 edition, why I would stop talking about a particular edition, is that the 1599 edition is going to be the first Protestant Bible that removes the Apocrypha from the Bible altogether. So prior to this, all Protestant Bibles have maintained the Apocrypha in them. They just keep them, generally, the later ones are going to keep them in that center portion between the Old Testament and the New Testament. That's what the Geneva Bible did. I believe that's what the Great Bible did. I don't know I can't remember if Coverdale did it that way or not. So the 1599 is going to be the first one to remove the Apocrypha from the Bible altogether, and will be the only one to do so for the next 200 years. It's going to be another 200 years before the KJV, actually over 200 years, before the KJV removes the Apocrypha from the English Bible. So the fact that you are sitting here today with a Protestant Bible in your lap without the Apocrypha in it is a very new thing in Christian history. Okay? Generally speaking, we've always had it. Up until very recently, we've always had it. We've always used it. We just never saw it as authoritative. And so not having the Apocrypha is a new thing. And like I said before, I think we should be using it, not to affirm doctrine, but because it's good and useful. That's been the Christian position throughout church history, and I think it should continue. That being said, the 1599 is the first one to remove it, and I'm fine with it being removed. I just don't want to see us stop using it. All right, then Theodore Beza does the 1604 edition, and that's his last one before he passes away the following year. We talked about, early on, we talked about Erasmus and the Greek manuscripts that he references, that he has. Then we talked about Stephanus being able to use Erasmus's works, and including 15 new manuscripts that he references. And then Beza references 2 more manuscripts. So what we're looking at is, by the end of the textual criticism of Beza, we're looking at roughly 24 or so manuscripts, a little over 24 manuscripts that have been used to produce these Greek New Testaments. Now, did Beza create a perfect work? He did 10 editions, finished by 1604. Did he create a perfect work? I'm going to show you a place that I don't think Beza got it right. And again, I'm near universal agreement that Beza got this one wrong. So in Revelation 16:5, I'm going to use the KJV here as representative of what Beza wrote. In Revelation 16:5, it says, and I heard the angel of the waters say, Thou art righteous, O Lord, which art and wast and shalt be, because thou hast judged thus. All right, so the KJV translators here chose Beza's rendering. And so this is representative of what Beza did. I'm going to just walk you through history and multiple languages to show you how what the church has been reading throughout all of church history up until Beza's rendering here. All right. So in the Syriac Peshitta, if you remember the Peshitta way back, we were talking about that. We talked about that with the LXX. And the English translation of the Peshitta says this, and I heard the angel of the waters say, righteous art thou who art and who wast and art holy, because thou hast done this judgment. If you notice, it says art holy instead of shalt be. So who art, who wast, and art holy, or who art and who wast and shalt be. So the question is it a declaration of God's holiness, or is it his declaration of his future state of being? Okay. Now, here's the thing. Both of these are true. It's just what's the reading here? We know throughout the book of Revelation, 3 other places, John, without contest, calls God who art, who was, and shall, and will be. There's a slight difference between how he renders it there versus how Beza renders it here. But who art, who was, and will be, and God is always called holy. So both statements are true. It's just, what did John write here? Did John write that he was declaring God was holy, or did John write the shall be part? So the Peshitta, very early, this is a very, very early translation, Aramaic translation of the New Testament, says art holy. The Latin Vulgate, so I left it in Latin for you to see. Era sanctus. Sanctus is where we get our sanctuary, saint. This all means holy. Okay, it's where we get our words for holy without the actual word of holy. So Latin Vulgate says, who art holy. And Wycliffe translates Latin Vulgate. And he says, so who was holy. And I'm keeping the KJV at the bottom so you can just see the shall be. Tyndale New Testament. Tyndale says, and holy. Coverdale says, and holy. The Geneva Bible says, and holy. This is the Olivetan French Bible. I couldn't get it. I decided to take a screenshot of the actual image of the page instead of write it out because I couldn't find it where I could just copy and paste it easily. So you got a screenshot. But anyway, I gave you an arrow. Also notice no verse numbers. They didn't exist yet. So the Olivetan Bible's before the verse numbers. And you see here, this is sanct. Okay, that F shape is actually an S sound. That's the font back then. Saint, who art holy in the French Bible. Then you've got Reina Valera, Spanish Bible. El Santo, saint or holy, who art holy. Then you've got, this is a good one. All right. So in my previous church, I had a man call me and challenge me on my position of the Textus Receptus and the KJV. And English is his second language. His first language was Russian. And he said one of the reasons he affirmed the TR and the KJV is because his Russian Bible and the Russian people received that Bible as the text to translate their Russian Bible from, the Textus Receptus. And he said, and he believed that his Russian Bible, his 1873 Russian Bible, was identical to his KJV. Now, I don't speak Russian, and I was driving in my car, and I said, I am willing, I'm a betting man. I'm willing to bet that your Russian Bible is not identical to the KJV. Because first of all, I've done this often enough. I know there's no two translations that agree on every textual variant and every translation difficulty. There's no two translations that agree. So I said, I'm willing to bet they don't. He says, well, if you can give me one spot then I'll think about it. I'm driving in my car. I said, I've done what I just showed you. I've done this in dozens of translations, dozens upon dozens, in different languages. I said, I'm willing to bet. I can't read Russian, and I've never looked at your Russian Bible. But if you go to Revelation 16:5, it will not agree with the KJV translators. It will say something different. He said, well, I'll look into it, and I'll call you back. And he never called me back. But right here, I looked it up. This is the Russian and are holy. Okay. I had a deacon from my previous church, also English as a second language, also spoke a different language. His was Romanian. Also believed the KJV was perfect and that the Textus Receptus was perfect as well. And I said, I bought him actually years ago. I bought him a Romanian KJV parallel Bible. So he could read it in Romanian and English simultaneously because Romanian was his first language and English was his second. And he wanted to challenge me on that. And so I said, well, look at Revelation 16:5. I'm willing to bet it doesn't match the KJV translators there. And the answer was that this reads art holy in Romanian in the Bucharest Bible of 1688. Every Bible, I have never looked at any Bible unless the Bible used the KJV as its source text to translate from. None of them pick and art. None of them pick and shall be in this verse. And so what's happening? Why does Beza, why does every church and why does Beza put shall be here? Beza looked at the book of Revelation, and 3 times this phrase comes up prior to this. And all 3 times ends with and will be. Who is and who was and will be. And Beza thought, well, that's what should be here. Even though he said he had one Greek manuscript that also read that way, we don't have that manuscript today. We don't know where he got it. In fact, 99.9%, no, 100%. I don't even know why I'm doing 100% of all of our manuscripts today all read the same way in this verse with being and holy. We don't have any manuscripts that read otherwise. Beza did what's called a conjectural emendation. A conjectural emendation is what textual critics do when they look at the manuscripts that they have available and they say, I think none of them are right. I think the actual reading should be this. And they insert that. That's what Beza did here. Okay. And no one accepted Beza's reading there, except the KJV translators did. The KJV translators weren't looking at manuscripts. They were looking at printed editions. So they were just comparing one printed edition with other printed editions, with Beza being the later work. We're going to show you they tended, not exclusively, but they tended to trust the later works over the earlier works as development of scholarship. We'll talk about that later. I ended up reading a whole book from a guy who's a TRKJV onlyist. It's a defense on the reading in the KJV on Revelation 16:5 and shall be. It was entirely unconvincing for me. It was the first one that actually helped me realize that the KJV might not be perfect. Just like none of the translations in your lap are perfect. I'm not picking on it. It just happens to be a position I used to have. And yeah, basically Nick Sayers' argument in this book is that he believes that, what's the word? Let's see if I wrote it. I know I wrote it. It's, I'm going to butcher it. Hosios is our word for holy, and asomenos, which is very close in spelling to Hosios, is the word for shalt be. And Nick Sayers' argument is that Hosios, holy, was just the shortened form, the abbreviation, the nomina sacra is where he's going to go with, of asomenos. When you do a study of nomina sacra, this doesn't fit. And in fact, let's go. There we go. I want to go this one. Beyond What Is Written is done by Jan Kranz. Jan Kranz did a whole dissertation on conjectural emendations done by Erasmus and Beza. Remember, they said, hey, I don't think any Greek manuscript I'm looking at is correct, so I'm going to pick a different reading. Beza seems to have picked his out of thin air. Erasmus generally leaned on the Latin Vulgate for his readings that didn't line up with any Greek manuscript. And he writes a whole book on it. This book was powerful for me, beyond what is written, goes through all of the conjectural emendations of Erasmus and Beza, and these readings that end up in some of our translations today. All right, so that's it for that. That's the family of texts that will be called eventually, we'll get to it, will eventually be called the Textus Receptus. But we're going to go back to England now. We're going to go back to England. So those are all of that's happening in Geneva. So we're going to go back to England. We're going to talk about Queen Elizabeth real briefly. Queen Elizabeth is the daughter of Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII. She's ascended the throne. And she has to make a decision as to what she's going to do with the Church of England. Okay. She's got a couple of options. She can stay Roman Catholic like Mary was prior. She could stay with the Roman Church. She can move more Protestant like Edward did. So these are her half-sister and her half-brother. She can go in these two directions. Instead, what she does, what she's convicted by, is to be that middle ground. She's going to be in the middle ground. She's going to keep the Church of England somewhere between the Roman Church and the Protestant Reformation. That's her intention. One of the first things she does is she puts Matthew Parker in charge of the Church of England. He's the Archbishop. He's what Cranmer was when he was alive. Okay, so he's the Archbishop. Remember, he is the one that was commissioned to raise her when Anne Boleyn was dying. When Anne Boleyn knew she was going to die, she gave Elizabeth to Matthew Parker and said, raise her. So Matthew Parker is now the Archbishop of the Church of England. The Book of Common Prayer is coming back. Remember, Mary got rid of the Book of Common Prayer and the English Bibles in the Church of England. So she brings back the Common Prayer, but she updates it. She revises it. One of the things that she updates is in the Book of Common Prayer, there's this thing called a rubric in the Book of Common Prayer. Rubric is the Latin word for red. And so you'll see these red headings in the Book of Common Prayer. Those are explanations as to what's going on at this time of liturgy. Are you kneeling? Are you standing? What's the priest doing? Are you responding to what the priest said? Things of that nature. So the rubrics are not to be read aloud. They're to tell you what you should be doing. The black text you read aloud. In 1552, Cranmer added what is called the black rubric. And the black rubric is essentially an explanation that the Lord's table, communion, the elements are natural. They're not transubstantiated, and they're not going to be transubstantiated. And there should be no confusion about this. And to be confused about this is to perform idolatry. That's the black rubric in 1552. Queen Elizabeth removes that in her edition. So she takes that out. It will get added back later, but remember, Henry VIII did not take any position against transubstantiation. He held transubstantiation all the way to his death. Edward did not. His son held what Cranmer held, which was that transubstantiation was not part of the Lord's table. So the black rubric was added after the fact. Elizabeth, being that middle ground, is going to remove it. She doesn't replace it with anything. She just removes the complete rejection of transubstantiation there. And then what we'll pick up next week, real briefly, is we'll pick up the 1568 Bishop's Bible. And Matthew Parker says, hey, while we're doing these updates, we should also update the Great Bible. And he's given oversight of that update, that revision, and that will be the 1568 Bishop's Bible. We'll talk about that next week. You all are dismissed.